Boom. You see the sign, it's recording on your side? Okay, yeah. Perfect. Okay. Okay, guys, welcome to my podcast. I call it Didrik Podcast because that's my middle name, Niklas Didrik Hallum. So, yeah, I'm a social scientist from Norway. I'm working with people who are going into internships in organizations, but on the other side, I'm working with this podcast to interview interesting people around the world that bring something new to the table, either just through experience or through research or just being fantastic people. So I wanted to have you guys on today because I have a history of, you can say, fatigue. I think that's the right question. I have hearing aids, and that demands a lot of energy from my system. And I had some infections through my days, you know, mononucleosis. I don't know what it's in English, but we call it kissing disease. I didn't know that I had it. So I had all kinds of natural infections throughout. At some point, my system was not working properly. About 10 years ago, I was doing a lot of exercise. I was like training heavy weighting lifts and was crazy active. But then suddenly, after one exercise, I had to go to bed like afterwards, crazy. And the following years, it got worse and worse. And I would say 5 years ago, it was like to get home from work, I had to lay down and do meditations to just manage to get home from work because it was so demanding. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Because I was attributing it to my hearing loss, and that, you know, people with hearing loss, as I said, they expel a lot of energy to hear. But I don't think that's the case. I think it's something else. Something was off. So I researched everything, and because I'd taken a master's degree, I like to research. So I went through all the hoops. I went through, like, I tested. I've been through the catalog of medication or supplements, and the doctors, they run like blood work on me every time I took my hearing test, and they found nothing wrong. Vitamin D levels, all kinds of levels was perfect. So it was kind of strange. So one day I was researching, and I came about a drug that was called Naltrexone, that was used for opiate addiction. People took it in high doses, 50 milligrams, to bind to the opiate receptors. So I think when they shoot heroin and stuff, that doesn't work, and it helps with withdrawal. And I see in Norway now that you use naltrexone as injections. So people who try to do drugs, they have a horrible experience. And I think this is going to be bigger and bigger as people experience it. But I saw that it worked at the low doses, and that's the term, low dose naltrexone. And I was like, okay, what is this? So I just asked my physician to give me the prescription, and he is a very nice guy. And the point is, I had to go to 2 or 3 physicians, because in Norway there's like, oh, this is not in the books, I don't know what it is, you don't get it. But finally I changed doctor, and he was like, yeah, sure, 10 years or 5 years of exhaustion is enough, you should try this. And within, I would say within 1 month, it was like, you know, when you have a boat that's leaking, it was like the leakage was propped, the energy leakage. So that's amazing. So it changed my life basically. So I went from laying on the floor and doing meditations a couple of times a day to actually having a normal, perfectly normal life. Even today, strenuous exercise is pretty hard. When I do really heavy exercise, it's still something that's not good, because the next couple of days I'm totally exhausted. And children's birthdays, oh my God, don't talk about it. I get totally exhausted as well. So that's my backstory, and that's why I'm here to talk with you today, because I think there's a lot of people out there who struggle with similarities like me, And I know that low-dose naltrexone doesn't work on all people. And I also understand that supplementing with vitamin D, I think it enhances LDN. So if you're low in vitamin D, it doesn't work right. So questions like this, I'm really eager to get answered. But most of all, I think people should know what this is. And the big thing is, why does it work? I haven't, in Norway, you get free medication if you send in papers on why it works. But this I have to pay for myself. But now you guys have started to figure out why it works. So now I can get this for free. So that's not my motivation for talking to you guys. But now you know like the backstory and why I'm interested. I think this is very important for a lot of people. So please introduce yourself and just take me through the first question. How did you guys discover naltrexone?
Well, firstly, my name is Professor Don Staines, and I'm a clinician and specialist public health physician, and I've been involved in outbreaks of communicable disease, and I'm co-director at the National Centre for Neuroimmunology and Emerging Diseases at Griffith University, Australia, with my colleague Sonya.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Professor Sonya Marshall-Gradisnik. I'm a Professor of Immunology and co-director of the National Centre for Neuroimmunology and Emerging Diseases at Griffith University. And I really have a keen interest in ME and CFS, just like my colleague here, because always it's been about patients for us. So patients are our priority, and what we do here is focus solely on them.
So Nicholas, maybe if I could just comment on the story that you just told us.
Yep.
And can I say that is a very typical story of what we see with patients.
Yep.
Many patients are in the younger age group, 20 to 40, that sort of thing. Many have a history of doing very extensive exercise, often multiple types of exercise with multiple sports, and people driving themselves very hard physiologically. And the story of a possible infection, and then either gradually or more suddenly succumbing to a more insidious illness involving profound fatigue, loss of memory and concentration, often visual and hearing disorders, muscle pain, and a number of other dimensions to that as well. So this is a very typical story of what you're describing.
Yeah, that's kind of reassuring that I'm not alone in this story.
If you go to the question you were talking about why naltrexone, I think historically we have to look at where we came from and how we then arrived at using naltrexone. And if you have been following what we do, we look at transient potential ion channel receptors, and they are intimately bound by function and structure with opioid receptors, in particular muoid opioid receptor. And it just so happens that naltrexone binds to that muoid opioid receptor and inhibits it. So that's a place where we've started from in terms of looking at ion channel and how we can hopefully improve the function of ion channel.
And
yeah, okay.
The reason why TRPM3 has responded so well to naltrexone, and as Sonya has said, it's inhibited by the mu-opioid receptor. So if you can take away that inhibition, then whatever function you've got is likely to be better promoted than if they did not have the drug. The second thing is that the TRPM3 receptor and ion channel is distributed throughout the human body, but it is particularly distributed in the brain and spinal cord, particularly in the eye, the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory and concentration, the cerebellum, which is responsible for balance, and throughout the body, including the cardiovascular system, gastrointestinal system, and so on. So when you look at the illness of ME/CFS and how multi-symptomatic it is, that there are so many systems in the body affected by the illness, then the TRPM3 impairment gives a very satisfactory explanation as to why those symptoms occur.
Okay, that makes sense. And that explain like when you have fatigue and you have a headache, like a fatigue headache, because the visual issues and hearing issues, I can't speak to them because I already have hearing aid, and yeah. So, but the feeling of the headache is definitely something that's huge for me. And so you guys were looking for something to open up these ion channels, like to release calcium into the system, because this is about the electric system of the body, right? Everything in the body is electric, and this calcium is running this electric system, right? So without calcium, electricity doesn't run, right?
Yeah, essentially. So if you look at the ion channels we've identified, we've shown that they, using the gold standard, that's patch clamp electrophysiology, we've shown that they are significantly impaired in ME/CFS patients, okay? And we haven't done this in one cohort, we've done it in numerous cohorts, in 5 separate cohorts actually. So we've reproduced it, and what we've also done is looked at the natural agonist that would activate that receptor. And we've shown that it's impaired using natural agonist. So of course, if we've got impairment in those receptors, what we're looking at is, like, every person wants to feel better. Every person that's an ME patient, they want a cure, they want to feel better. So we looked at ways that we might be able to restore or bypass, if I can use that word, to improve the function of those ion channels. And it just so happens that the mu opioid receptor is intimately, as I said, bound in function and structure to this ion channel, the TRPM3. So when we use the naltrexone, it actually removed the inhibition and allowed then restoration of these ion channels in ME/CFS patients.
Okay, so restoration, can you speak to me, because I explained it like it's opening up for calcium to get in. Like how does it restore it? Is it like can you be a bit more like in layman's terms?
We have to remember that the TRPM3 ion channel comes in probably more genetic variations or isoforms than other of the TRP receptors. Okay, TRPM3 stands out, and by that it could be 15 or 20, no one really knows for sure. And each one of those will transmit calcium ions better or worse. And what we think might happen is that perhaps more channels are being expressed that do not transmit the calcium as well. And by giving naltrexone, we're either enabling those channels to function better or to give preference to the ones that are functioning well. So look at it that it's not one particular channel. There's about, as I say, 15 or more subtypes of the channels that are used in various locations to do various tasks. And we're still working out which of those channels are the ones that are compromised in ME/CFS.
Interesting. So, yeah, okay. So it's like a set of channels that the drug can affect, and all these channels are. Is this channel? Is it the nervous system, or what is the, like these ion channels? That's
they're everywhere.
They're everywhere in the
everywhere,
and
mostly
of them
in the brain.
And in the brain.
Mostly in the brain, and that explains why many patients have problems with vision. They have problems with light. For example, light is actually perceived physiologically as painful, and many patients find they have to remain in a darkened environment because light, when they get it, really makes them feel very sick, and it's actually experienced as a terrible kind of pain. And the same with noise and sound. Basic mechanism works on the mobilization of responses to energy waves in sound, and that also is interpreted as a painful or intolerable stimulus. But as I say, there are many locations in the brain where TRPM3 are located.
Yeah, but it explains why children's birthdays with a lot of noise can be a demanding experience.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what I have done that is perfect for this, when I'm really exhausted, I go in take a bath and I turn off all the lights, or I go into the shower, turn off the lights, or go into a dark room, turn off the lights. And after 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the senses is like it's resetting.
Yes.
Yes.
And then I can go out and start again. I get
Because
like,
the ion channels can then go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the system just need a reboot and recalibration, because it's, you know, when everybody at some point is really exhausted, and then your spouse or your siblings or anything, anything they do can be like really irritating, and you can get really angry because you are on edge. It's like that twofold maybe, or something. Yeah. You can be just extremely sensitive for any kind of impressions. So I think that helps people, just that knowledge that it doesn't make you like bad, not necessarily that you do something bad, but it explains your sensitivity when you are totally exhausted. That you have to address that. Okay, so but you guys were looking for a medication that manipulated or opened or adjusted these channels. So you did some research, Google Scholar, or was it through a friend? How did you initially discover naltrexone?
Well, I think you first of all have to think about what we do here. We're very rigorous with our research design and research methodology. And with that, the approach is always fundamentally robust research design and robust research methodology. So the research methodology is obviously gold standard. We do patch clamp, and that's the identification of disease. That's used not just with ME CFS, but that's used how you identify a disease state using patch clamp. So from that, then we obviously have spent, and I mean, over 20,000 hours of reading, looking at the literature in terms of we identified the receptor dysfunction. So then it's about combing through the literature, not ME CFS literature, but the literature on receptors and how they interact with other receptors, and finding those particular receptors and what drugs are being used off-label or for repurposing, and seeing if they actually have an indirect effect on these ion channels. So when I say thousands and thousands of hours of reading, that's exactly what it's taken in obviously peer-reviewed, high-level peer-reviewed journals. Don?
And part of that scientific rigor that Sonya was describing is the fact that we are hypothesis-driven. We do not go on fishing expeditions where we just sort of, try and look at everything that moves and see if we get a result. We have very clear hypotheses that we set down for ourselves and test those hypotheses. And that's exactly what we're able to do using natural killer cells from patients and also from healthy controls, where we can measure very accurately the effect of the ion channels on those cells. So we can then test a hypothesis as to whether a particular drug is effective or it makes no difference. And it's on the basis of those very rigorous scientific results, based on a very clear hypothesis or a set of hypotheses, that we're able to come up with highly significant data, which of course is then able to be published, and which we have.
Interesting.
Can I just add in relation to that, Nicholas, this is not a research finding that has come from just a hypothesis. This has been built upon the last 5 years of chipping away at one hypothesis, then confirming that, moving to the next hypothesis to delve deeper and explore what we found previously and explain it a little bit further with the next hypothesis, and building then to the next hypothesis from that. So it's a culmination of many years of really strict research design and hard questions we ask of each other to make sure that what we have is the best possible research data we can generate to then solve the pathomechanism of this illness. And then obviously with that then comes not the cart and the horse. You have to answer what is the pathomechanism of this illness, which we are doing. And then from that, then how can we actually look at treatments? And that makes sense. We haven't just given a treatment or, looked at a treatment. We've actually built upon this hypothesis for a number of years.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's you guys are just describing science, how it really should be done, or one way of science. So like your expedition to find it in this is like advanced needle in the haystack operation. So that's really impressive that you have done it so from a solid foundation. And today, can you do like use computers to find like medication that is probably can affect these receptors, or is it just done, like you said, through old school reading? Is there a database where you can just, okay, I want something that affects these receptors?
You actually can, and you can start that way, but we've taken a very considered, a very conservative approach, not to give patients false hope, but take those steps, the necessary, considered and conservative steps. And that's where we've built the first publication from, obviously the Naltrexone paper, the low dose Naltrexone paper. And let's just say there's more to come, but they're a very considered way we're doing it. We're not, basically looking at everything. We're taking a very specific and targeted approach at the moment.
Okay, so I have a question about fish oil, because when this is maybe a side question, but before I had naltrexone, fish oil, when I was totally exhausted, I took fish oil and my brain was soothed, my headache disappeared. Do you know anything about why DHA or EPA or why this works, or do you have any knowledge about that?
So did you say DHEA?
Yeah, DHA, like what the contents of fish oil. I think it's EPA and DHA. Yeah.
So if you look at the pure structure of DHEA or DHEAS, for example, but DHEA is an agonist of tryptophan-3. Okay. And so obviously, as Don was saying, these receptors are heavily concentrated, in the brain, in the nervous system, the gastrointestinal tract, cardiac, skeletal muscle, immune, etc. So with the potential use of such a supplement, it may have, I'm not saying to advocate for it, it may have a beneficial effect in terms of what we're targeting with these ion channels. May I just say that particular supplements we are currently looking at that are targeting the tryptophan-3.
That's one of them you're looking at?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, because there's a lot of receptors and naltrexone may be affecting some of them, but it may be that you need a cocktail of different things to really address the entire area.
Yeah, exactly.
And remember that the story may vary from patient to patient. I mean, our thing is that no two patients are completely alike. They will have subtle differences in their symptoms or their presentation or their history, and that could well be a function of the fact that there's such a variety of tryptophan-3 receptors in the body. Therefore, it makes sense that perhaps other different types of drugs or agents will have a beneficial effect. And it may be, as you use the word, a cocktail of 1, 2 or 3 different drugs, may be better in one person than another. And that's what we'll be working on in the future. Okay, so can you screen for dysfunction in this tryptophan-3 receptor? What was the name of the receptor?
Tryptophan-3 we're focused on at the moment, and tryptophan-2 and some others as well.
Tryptophan-3 and tryptophan-2?
Yes.
Okay.
And others, yeah.
Okay, and can you screen for dysfunction in people?
Well, that's work in progress. And as we said, because they're all a little bit different, and be grouped. And the researchers who recently were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology had done work in originally identifying some of the TRP receptors. So what has been identified is that these are very, very important receptor ion channels that go way back in evolutionary terms and are fundamental to survival. So the fact that we can now identify disease processes around them, and we're not the only ones. There is an ever-growing literature of disease states that are identified with the various trips. There's quite a lot. There's about 28 or so of different types of trips in the body. They're not all TRPM3, there's a number of others. And therefore, different types of illnesses are now being identified. So it comes as no surprise that TRPM3 is associated with a particular pathology. It just happens to look like any CFS.
Okay, interesting. So can you describe what kind of, like you guys do have patients and test it out on them? Is that something you do in your research? Okay, can you speak a little bit about your experience using this on patients?
Using what, sorry, Mr.
Using Naltrexone on patients, like how does people respond? Because I know not everyone responds.
So can I just say that if we were to embark on that type of activity, that would be a clinical trial. And so,
yes.
So we aren't doing a clinical trial at the moment. We're endeavouring to do one next year. Okay. But in saying that, what we have been doing is taking blood from patients.
Yep.
And those patients have been taking LDN, low dose naltrexone, through their GP. Okay.
Yeah.
Or other medical practitioner. And we have looked at their blood and looked at their ion channel function.
Yep.
And we can actually look at the voltage. And what we're reporting is that they're significantly restored in terms of their function of their ion channels.
How many percentage are we restored?
Oh, like 100% of their natural killer cell ion channel function, the TRPM3. So, and that's not done on one cell, that's not reading on one cell, two cells reading. We actually, read at least 12. We take a cohort of 12 cells from each patient and read, when I say read, actually measure their ion channel function. Now that's a skill set that no one has in the world. We do it. There's only myself and 2 other people here that can do it. So it's a real unique skill set, but I think the testament of that skill set is the illness is obviously being very hard to diagnose and find the pathology. And I think it just says that, we're highly skilled and we're across what the pathology is.
The last thing you said again?
Oh, it's a unique skill set that's discovered, and what we have, that unique skill set.
Yeah.
Discovering the pathomechanism of this illness.
Yes, that's very, very interesting. So this voltage analysis, that's very interesting that it's 100%. And I know the half-life of LDN, I think it's 4 hours. In 4 hours, it's out of the system. So like for me now, I have this 3 milligram. I take it in the morning and then midday, like after it's gone 4 hours, and take a half in the evening because I don't need full dose. So for me, I have 7.5 milligrams a day. And that's just come from experience. In the beginning, I read that it's just 4.5 milligrams. So, but I thought, like, when I read this about half-life, I was like, well, okay, after 4 hours, I need a new dose. And that significantly changed my experience. Can you speak a little bit about that, the dosage regimen and stuff?
Also, well, I think it's worth commenting that all patients are different and they'll have various severity of the illness. They will respond variably to different doses and also perhaps to different medications. So what we're trying to do is standardize using the laboratory processes that we have to produce the sort of data that Sonya has just described. And there's such a compelling response to this medication. So that's all data which will be very valuable when we submit to do a clinical trial. And then the purpose of a clinical trial is to attempt to answer exactly that question. What doses work best for different people and why is that so? So we have to go into it with an open mind. We cannot say it's going to be this particular dose that's going to work for everyone. We cannot say that at the moment, but we're going in there prepared to understand why different doses will have different effects for different people.
Very interesting. Because I read that up till 12 milligrams, it's considered low dose, so it can be different for people. So people who try 3.5, they can be like, I have no effect, I stop it. And then really their dose can be 6, 7, 8. So this is something people should have in mind. And can you speak about this, the factor of vitamin D? Do you know anything about that enhancing LDL?
Well, before we get onto that, just to finish off on naltrexone, as I said, that patients will respond differently, and some patients may be intolerant to a. So at this point, we are not recommending people to go get as much naltrexone as they can get there. We are not saying that at all. This has to be very carefully managed in a proper scientifically conducted clinical trial where we can observe for any effects that people have, and that they will be incorporated into the results of the clinical trial. So to move on to your question about vitamin D, we really don't want to make any comments scientifically about the product at all until we can prove in the laboratory that it is likely to be efficacious. And as Sonya mentioned before, we see patients on a huge range of supplements and different drugs or different natural remedies or whatever they take. Overall, the evidence for those is fairly thin, but I stress that until we've been able to test these various interventions in the laboratory or through a properly controlled clinical trial, it's speculation, and we would prefer not to do that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, can you speak about the connection between this TPM3? Am I saying it right?
TRPM3, yeah.
TRPM3.
Okay, okay, makes sense. Because it makes you, okay, TRPM3 and the mitochondria. What's the connection there? Why are people exhausted?
So I think if you think about a cell, and the cell surface is where we focused on with these ion channels, but inside the cell, there's lots of different places inside the cell that have got different factories, such as the mitochondria. But the mitochondria actually has these ion channels on the cell surface.
Ah, makes sense.
So people don't assume that what's on the outside of the cell is on the inside. They don't understand that there's, it's both the same, basically. So when you think about the mitochondria, the TRPM3 are located on the mitochondria. So if you've got a decreased function of ion channel function on the cell surface, then the genetics are going to be the same, aren't they? What happens on the cell surface, the ion channel is not going to function the same. So that means that there will be less calcium coming inside the mitochondria, which then means there's less ability to generate ATP. And so when you look at the ion channel and the interaction of how it produces the ATP, it requires obviously calcium as a cofactor. And with these ion channels being reduced in function, stands to reason they're going to be reduced on the mitochondrial cell surface as well. So hence, when you then have, and people might say, well, what does that mean? Yes, there's less energy, less ATP, but also that causes then reactive oxygen species. It causes inflammatory response because you've got the cell under stress. And so subsequently, the cytokines that are being produced, the inflammatory cytokines, the reactive oxygen species that are being produced in some reported studies, it's a downstream product of what's actually happening with the changes of the ion channel, which is the origin of the illness.
That sounds makes a lot of sense, because before I had the LDN, my reaction to acute or a lot of stress was like a feverish, like I had a flu in the evening, and the next day it was gone, but it was like coming every time I knew it was going on. Exhaustion, flu-like symptoms, boom. But now all this, I'm really happy that all this flu-like stuff is gone. I can be really exhausted after a children's birthday or exercise, and the next day I'm really empty, but still I have not these flu-like symptoms and stuff. those are totally gone. So that makes a lot of sense, these downstream negative effects that you're talking about. And it's good that you explain this connection with the mitochondria, because it's like, okay, finally an explanation. Like, at least it sounds very, very plausible that this is the mechanism that's driving this illness. So,
Nicholas, earlier on in the interview, you mentioned that if you did some exercise, it could take you a number of days to recover.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely understandable, as because the TRPM3 receptors are compromised and there's limited calcium coming into cells. When the body is subjected to any, when I say exercise, it could be muscle tissue, but then all cells in the body, if they're put under increased demand, that have TRPM3, they are also going to suffer in some degree some impairment. And it takes time for the receptors to build up again, or enough of the better functioning receptors to build up to enable the calcium to be restored. That takes time, over several days or maybe weeks. And some people just have to do fairly, you might say, trivial amounts of exercise, like walking to the front of the house to their post box to get their mail or whatever, their morning paper, and then come back. That kind of exercise may be enough to put them back in bed for a week. And it just shows how dramatic the effect of these ion channels is on all of those tissues, and including muscle tissue.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But then my follow-up question is, when you are opening up the gate, so to speak, for the calcium to get into the body, would it be a smart thing to supplement with calcium as well?
No, because it's not the problem. There's plenty of calcium in the body.
Okay.
Plenty of calcium in the extracellular fluid. The problem is getting it into the cell when you need it, right? So the response time is very important, not just the quantity, but it's got to be brought in when you need it. And there's a type of calcium signaling that involves detection of the levels of calcium inside the cell, in the stores of calcium. And when that's depleted, it sends a message to the cell or the membrane surface or the mitochondria to open up and allow more calcium to come in. And if that's compromised, that takes time to happen. And therefore you get this delay effect before the cell can replenish itself in calcium. So the amount outside the cell is irrelevant, because it's getting it into the cell specifically through these ion channels. That is the key thing.
Okay, yeah, okay. So the blood or body has enough calcium it can draw from. That's no problem.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's not the issue.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, that's an interesting thing. So my next question, we were just touching about it. Different compounds that does the same thing, that affects the TRPM3. We talked about the DHEA, that's in fish oil. I have a hunch that vitamin C does the same thing. You can maybe answer that. What do we know? Which substances affect this in a positive way? Or
at this stage, we would prefer not to comment, as
Okay.
we mentioned before, until we have done the scientific experiments. We're really speculating.
Okay.
Now, there may be some evidence in the literature of what drugs or vitamins or whatever may be efficacious. We would rather not comment until we have done exactly the same thing with a carefully driven hypothesis and proper scientific investigation, and we have the data to prove it. But we are optimistic that there will be a number of drugs, for example, that may be useful, but let's wait and see until we've had the opportunity to do that. And look, as Sonya said at the beginning, our priority is for patients. And if we can undertake a clinical trial, and we're hoping to schedule that in for next year, where we can show proven benefit in the clinical situation of the patient, not just in the bloods in the laboratory, important as that is. If we can show that benefit, then there would be a case to recommend, for example, those particular types of drugs or in that class of naltrexone or whatever, or DHEA that may be proven as a therapeutic benefit in ME/CFS. But for other,
makes sense.
we always get asked this at conferences, and we always have the same response. We can't speculate on to other substances until we have the scientific evidence.
Okay, so there's no papers on things already in the literature that has an effect on this. That you can
Not in terms of the research. You must understand that we have a methodology that we follow.
Yeah.
So we have to apply any of those drugs or substances in the methodology that we use in the lab.
Okay, that makes sense.
We're able to comment.
Okay, if you switch the question then, do you know anything that has a negative effect on these receptors?
Look, you make a really interesting question, and we could spend a whole day talking about that. Because these receptors are used to detect environmental stimuli, different drugs or food products, alcohol, there's a range of these substances that can negatively impact. Why that happens is a very complicated story. But as we know with people with ME/CFS, many have food intolerances. And that's either because of either preservatives or certain molecules or certain highly spiced foods, for example. There's a very wide range of things. But of them all, probably alcohol tends to be the most devastating. When we talk to patients, they say that they may have enjoyed a bottle of wine or whatever when they were healthy, but since they've become ill, they can tolerate very, very little alcohol at all before becoming very unwell. So I would be speculating to say how that works at the moment, but you're right, there's probably a range of food products and other things that make people worse.
I think also you've got to look at what's a real activator. And when you talk to patients, they always say, look, I don't have any chemicals in the house. I don't go on long journeys. I don't go in the car. I don't like planes. I don't do any type of real movement. All those are stressors, or they're called threats. And these receptors are activated by those particular stimuli. So if you think about a seesaw being in balance, when you layer these stressors or threats upon the seesaw, inevitably you get a changing in the function because the cell's under more demand at one particular point. So it produces these receptors and they could be quite dysfunctional. And hence that's how the manifestation of the ME/CFS develops. So those particular stimuli or threats, there's a multitude of them that are activators. Hence, a lot of patients withdraw from society and take that management program into their own hands because they know what really makes them worse. So
okay, interesting. Yeah, because
there's lots of things.
Yeah. It might be that just over too much stress over a prolonged period can set these receptors. They can be over. It might be that even not just an infection. That's something we will see in the future. But I totally agree with alcohol. If you even a glass of alcohol, you feel the system the day after is totally shattered, and it's like one glass of wine is like one bottle for a normal person, and it affects your psyche as well. It's very hard to bounce back. So I totally agree with people. If people watch this and feel like shit after drinking, I would probably address that. And of course, I stopped drinking coffee and tea with caffeine because I know caffeine also sets off, caffeine creates cortisol, and any kind of stressor. I don't think these receptors are very happy about that. So I think that's a good way to manage it. Just I don't like a half glass of wine to dinner. That can be good if you have like fats. But I think people should be very careful because, it's like a marathon for your body, I think.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And interestingly, people self-select. When you look at their home, they'll say they don't have, as Sonya was saying, they don't have bleachers, for cleaning products. They are very careful of hair shampoo or for soap. or dry cleaning when they or deodorants or perfumes. These are all chemical stimulants which can set off these receptors, and if they are not functioning properly, you get a pathological response. Same with alcohol.
Yeah, and I would guess everything that supports ATP production, like all of us have tried a lot of supplements that does that. They are crutches, but I think LDN goes to the root of the problem. And I think that's the difference. Like you can get a long way with PQQ and all these ATP supplements, but without getting calcium into the cell, you never will. That's a huge difference. And I don't. If for the people this works for, I think they will feel the difference. For the people this doesn't work for, the search will be to find other drugs that hits on other receptors that may be off, because they can be
within that family. Within the TRPM3 family, there's quite a divergent range.
How many? How many receptors?
Well, at least 15. Yeah, 12 to 15. Maybe as many as 20. No one really knows. But there are more subtypes of TRPM3 than any other TRP receptor. So, you know, we're looking at the needle in the haystack there. You know, I mean, the haystack's got 15 or possibly more subtypes that all could be compromised to a greater or lesser extent.
Okay. I would guess that when these receptors get calcium, like any bodily system, it can heal itself. That's what I'm hoping for. And I feel for me, I had a somewhat upward trajectory. Like even though I've been on the same dose for 1 year, I feel that my system is, I'm not 100%, but I feel that it's getting more normal.
You're seeing improvement.
A notable improvement.
Yeah, slowly. Like, of course, if I'm exhausted, I'm back to normal. But I feel the day after is not so crazy as it's been before. Yeah. So that's the hope, that these receptors will be restored. It may take many years, but at one point, maybe I even can stop taking LDN because they have regained their function. And but then, of course, I have to remove, if it's not a viral thing, if it's a stress thing, has to do with my hearing, that I stress crazy amount to hear, then it might be something I have to address that way. But if it's something viral, that is something I also am addressing at the side. I'm talking with my doctor to figure out, like, you know, these enteroviruses and stuff, that's really hard to get rid of. So I'm at the same time trying to get rid of any kind of latent viral infection, because I have researched this a lot, and I think that it might be that there is some viral infection that spikes up and affects these receptors. I don't know, but that's what might be my thoughts been.
They're likely to, because the virus, and it doesn't have to be just viruses, it can be bacteria, it can be protozoan, other types of organisms. They are all threats which are recognized by the TRPM3 ion channel, right? So therefore, all of those agents in the environment can act as threats to these receptors, and can arguably produce receptors which are not as well functioning. And maybe, just maybe over time, the body learns to adapt and starts to produce again the better functioning receptors. We don't know that for sure, that's a speculation, but that could explain why people gradually get better.
Okay, and if you have infection, would the lower TRPM3 makes it easier for bad actors in the body to get access to your body? Like if you have like a viral infection and you dysfunctioning TRPM3, is it easier to take over such a weakened body?
Well, because the TRPM3 is so important for the functioning of the immune system, particularly cells, we know that because of the impaired TRPM3, natural killer cells and other immune cells do not work as well. likely that the infection or the effects of the infection will last longer.
Yes.
And anecdotally, people usually say they feel bad for 2 or 3 times as long as other members of the family. Say the family get all the same virus, right? The kids get better in a couple of days, or your spouse gets better in a few days. It may take you a week or 2 weeks to feel better. It just seems to take longer to recover.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like the entire system has a longer recovery rate. That's like the base.
Well, if you look at, say, for example, natural killer cells, ME/CFS patients consistently show that they've got a significant reduction in their function of natural killer cells. Now, natural killer cells are responsible for killing off virus infected cells or tumor infected cells. So hence that delay in the recovery may be due to, obviously, the reduced function of the natural killer cell.
Yeah.
Now, ME/CFS is not a natural killer cell disease, okay? It's just a key attribute, a key marker of showing in ME/CFS patients, they have low natural killer cell function, not numbers, but the function of the cell. And you might say, well, how does a natural killer cell perform its function? The very key component to cause a natural killer cell to lyse or kill off a virus, it requires calcium. It requires calcium at the very last phase, amongst others, but the very last stage of a natural killer cell to kill a virus infected cell or a tumor infected cell. It requires calcium to cause that effect. So if you've got less calcium coming inside, for example, a natural killer cell, which we've shown, and there's less calcium stored inside a natural killer cell, which we've also shown, then we've also then shown there's reduced natural killer cell function in ME/CFS patients. So going to your question about viruses, of course, there may be a delay in how that virus is cleared.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that also stresses that even though you haven't got naltrexone or it doesn't work for you, to support natural killer cells in your body with something, that would be a smart idea, I think.
Yeah, it's more about the support of the ion channel and where they're located and how naltrexone,
of course,
restoration of the ion channel, whether it be, in the reticular activation system in the brain, which controls memory, cognition, speech, judgment, okay, or whether it's, on the skeletal muscle or the cardiac muscle, the ion channel, where they're located and their dysfunction. Naltrexone is assisting, we've shown, using an immune cell model to restore the function of that ion channel.
So that's basically what you need, and that's, you have to go to the source with the calcium problematic is. And my question is, if you take naltrexone and you show that you have increased voltage in your blood that's normalized after you take it, is it possible that you don't feel the difference in your body? Would that even be possible?
You wouldn't show a change in the voltage. It's only the change in the voltage going inside the cell to allow the calcium to come in.
It's very funny. When we talk about voltage or electrical activity, we are only talking about the ion channel.
On the cell surface.
Okay. And you can show that it works in a person or not working?
Correct.
Yeah, we do it on the cells. That's what we do in the laboratory.
Yes,
so,
perfect.
I'll give you an example of the detail that takes, okay? So we do 1 person a day, whether it's a healthy control or an ME/CFS patient. It takes us 12 hours from when we take the blood to when we're actually satisfied with all the testing we've done. So I go back to the first statement when we started the interview. Yeah. Patients are our priority. Patients come first. So we treat each sample every day with the utmost care and the utmost respect to make sure we get the right results for understanding and identifying the pathology. Yeah. We're not mass mass amounts of generating data. We're here in a hypothesis-driven capacity
Yes.
to solve illness for patients, and that's what it takes.
Yes, and you can check from A to B when there is a difference. So my question
Correct.
is, when you speak to the people, what do they say when they come from point A to point B?
So are you referring to LDN?
Yes, if it works on them.
Yeah.
How you like the verbal testimonials, not just blood work.
Yeah, and we have many patients that report, just like you, after a month or a little bit longer, they notice a significant amount of improved cognition, improved memory, less lag time, they call it, from if they've done something to recovering even more effectively, and with a shorter lag time, if I can say, from when they started to renewing how they feel again. Most definitely, there's numerous, and when I say numerous patients report that. And I think, you know, if it was easy to solve, it would have been solved before, right? And that's what we're here to do. We're here to solve it, and we're going forward with what we're finding and solving it very, very meticulously. But that's what good science is. It's not rushed. It's considered.
Yeah, I think this is extremely important work you're doing, and it's important to do it right, as you say, because this drug is off patent as well. So you have to do it so rigorous you can because people tend to want to make money on their medication, but this is something bigger. This is something that's affecting so many people, families, society in a whole. So the importance of solving this problem is of utmost importance, because it may be that this fatigue also can have come from different, like this TRPM3. As you said earlier, it can be different diseases as well. So it can be a bigger picture that you are tapping into, right? Not just
for all of the trips, There's a number of different subfamilies of trips, and they all have different effects in terms of diseases. So it comes as no surprise that the TRPM3 family should have some disease associated with it. It just happens to look like ME/CFS.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, if you've got dysfunctional trips, the cell is under stress. It's producing inflammatory products, which cause more exhaustion to the cell, and as a whole system, the patient feels obviously overwhelmed because they've got an inflammatory response and a reactive oxygen species response, so free radicals. So that's an overwhelming system-based response, which is contributing also to the fatigue. But the origin is obviously because of the ion channel dysfunction.
Yeah, is that the IL-6? What's the biggest pro-inflammatory cytokine that's produced as a byproduct?
Well, there's a number that feature, but I think the key component people need to appreciate with studies that are done on cytokines. We published a paper, I think 18 months ago, and it was a systematic review. We looked at all the cytokine data that had been produced in ME/CFS research, and we undertook a quality assurance to look at, you know, were there cytokines that indicated, you know, a biomarker or the pathology of the illness. And at the moment, it was showing, we reported no, it did not indicate a biomarker or the pathomechanism, obviously. And the reason possibly for that is we suggested people needed to go back and do things a little bit tighter. And when people have taken these cytokine profiles, they've taken it from the blood. Now, each immune cell produces a unique signature of inflammatory cytokines and anti or pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So isolating particular cells and looking at their inflammatory profiles would be a way of then saying, well, look, this is a more specific, unique path of a signature that ME/CFS patients are uniformly showing. So, you know, that's why we look at how people might feel exhaustion. The origin is obviously ion channel dysfunction. Downstream are the cytokine productions of pro-inflammatory nature and reactive oxygen species, which then flood systemically and the patient feels overwhelmed in a holistic whole manner.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that sounds like something that would be good to get answered, to do these studies on the cell level and see what's actually profile of what's being released after when the exhaust from this system, to say it in more layman terms. Okay, so that explains why it works to address like pro-inflammatory cytokines with supplements, but that's not the main problem. Okay, so oxygen. Is there any benefit of getting oxygen into the system when you're dealing with MF, CFS?
Again, you would have to be very careful to follow a specific hypothesis with what you. We know what the pathology is, right? It's a TRPM3 pathology.
Or ion channel.
It's an ion channel pathology. There are probably others associated as well. So that's what we need to be focusing on. And again, it comes down to someone says it's such a drug or another food product or oxygen could be beneficial. Unless there are very carefully controlled clinical trials, then we're not able to comment on those.
Okay, it makes sense. My question was more like, does oxygen affect this TRPM3 at all? Like, that was more precise phrasing.
Well, I think if you look, every cell requires oxygen. So, if they're not being supplied the correct amount of oxygen, they're going to be under duress and stress. So, but that's not related to ion channel work. We're just ion channel.
Okay, perfect. Okay, this is very, very interesting. So, going forward, what are you going to do now?
Well, in saying where are we going forward, I think we never stop here, which is a good thing. And so I think we've already got mapped out the next 2 years, but we're very lucky in terms of we're fluid. Okay, if we find a unique result with a project that's running in the laboratory, we then allocate resources immediately to that. So in saying where are we now, where to from here, where obviously the 3 main areas we focus on are identification of the pathomechanism or pathology of the illness. We're well across that. And then obviously those unique qualities we can now test in the lab for a screening/diagnostic test. Now, in addition to that, because we're across the pathomechanism, we're well and truly advanced with the drug pharmacotherapeutic investigation. So we've got a number of pharmacotherapeutics we're focusing on in the next 12 months. And I think it would be remiss of us to actually not mention there are people that are reporting long haul COVID, and there's quite similar characteristics, clinical presentation of long haul COVID with ME/CFS. Now, this may be of benefit for patients for ME/CFS to get more international recognition for their illness. But we have to be careful. We have to really do well-constructed research design experiments, testing to see whether or not there are similar functional capacities of long-haul COVID that are the same or similar to ME/CFS patients. And that's also an area where we're heading at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's one good thing that's coming out of this, that there's a lot of attention directed to exhaustion post-infection, and that can benefit a lot of people more than people, unfortunately, who gone through COVID, because this has been affecting us all. So I think this going to maybe open up the eyes to this kind of research and hopefully funding and everything as well, because I see that this on FLCC, the group that's working with COVID therapies, they have Naltrexone as one of their medication, as their what do they have, second line, they call it, second line therapy. Yeah, so a lot of people have started using it for post-COVID. So if we can get some really good results on that, that would be very, very interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so you're doing your research and you are now doing a new clinical trial, or are you in the midst of a clinical trial?
We're aiming to do that next year.
Okay.
Said throughout, what our aim here is to collect the right data that will be very solid evidence for going forward to a clinical trial. Obviously, there are very important steps in the research world before you can do a clinical trial. You must have very good preliminary evidence. You must have it meticulously planned. All of that, be aware of possible side effects and being able to monitor different drugs, dosages that are good for people. So all of that is looking to the future, where Sonya and I are just immensely proud and thrilled at the success of the research team here. And it's a team, you know, it's not just us. We have wonderful younger researchers who come through and postdocs, and they all contribute to the research outcomes. But above all, this would not be possible without the patients. We found the patients have just been beyond wonderful in the support they've given us, being able to come and produce their samples of blood when they're often not well. This is the thing, often patients are feeling incredibly unwell, and sometimes they just can't make it to have the bloods taken, but we understand that and we work around that. But none of this would be possible without the patients.
That's very, very good. And I'm very grateful that you guys are doing the work you're doing, because it's so important for me personally. And I think a lot of people are going to be interested in this discussion. I know there's a lot of people on Reddit that are together and talking to each other, who's interested to listen to this conversation and where you are in your research. So that's going to be interesting. And of course, just people on YouTube who's searching for answers to what's going on. And I think you are painting a very coherent picture of this illness. And I'm very excited for the future. So
thank you very much. And Nicholas,
thank
you for taking the initiative to contact us. It's been an absolute delight to meet you and to talk with you. And we'd like to do more in the future when we have further results or whatever. So please keep in touch, and we will do everything we can to respond to you. And any questions that you have or that your friends might have, more than happy to address those.
Thank you. That's very generous, and I will definitely be following your work and look forward to the next episode and more interesting news and hopefully very good news.
We wish you all the best.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye-bye.